All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. The title of my presentation is Physicians and Healers, and it's based on an oral history project that I did to complete my requirements for an Indigenous Methods course that I took at UBC this year. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded Coast Salish territory where this project took place and where I'm presenting my work today. And I'd really like to thank the participants in the project who shared so generously of their time and of their stories for my work. And in particular, I'd like to thank Jen Dehoney, who's with me today and who'll be making some comments afterwards. I want to acknowledge my professor, Dr. Dory Nason, and my classmates in First Nations Studies 320 who accepted me in the class where I felt included and inspired as a mature student, and to my family who really encouraged me to keep learning and supported me as I struggled with the technology of learning in this century. So first of all, who am I? I was born in Haisla territory in Kitimat, and I raised my children in Haida territory, and I consider myself a settler ally of British European ancestry, and also a mother of 2 sons, and a family doctor and a medical educator. And I was adopted into the Skidegate Giddens Eagle clan in Haida Gwaii. So a little bit about the background of my study. My oral history project was a study within a larger medical education study that's taking place at Vancouver Native Health Society in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And the Physicians and Healer project brings together Western medical education training with Aboriginal elder teaching of family practice residents. And it assesses if this model of teaching and mentoring improves the cultural safety and experiences of care for urban Aboriginal community members. So my oral history research question was, what are the past work experiences and inspirations of people who work together on the Physicians and Healers project? And I was really interested in the subject because I want to learn more about how to do research in a good way with Indigenous partners and communities. And that's why I took this course. As a non-Indigenous academic, I really wanted to understand what I could learn about working in a good way. And I wanted to learn from elders and others who are working together in collaborative ways and to explore what brings them together. I'm also really drawn to what inspires people to become involved as teachers of family doctors and what sustains them in their work. And as a site director for a family medicine training site, I'm very keen to recruit excited preceptors and people that are inspired by working together, so I had a bit of an ulterior motive in getting to know them a bit more. I also, as a medical educator, was very aware that there's a big gap in the Canadian medical education literature around Indigenous health and culturally appropriate or safe care. So my methodology was from the perspective of a relational Indigenous research paradigm. And this is where relationships inform the processes of the research. And the relationship places the researcher within a network of connections and accountability. So everything that I did, I had to be as conscious as I could about taking a decolonizing approach, by which I mean really focusing on respect for diverse worldviews, working on reciprocity, and not only looking at how this research was going to benefit me as a learner and bring new knowledge forward, but what benefit would it bring to the participants themselves and to the communities that we all serve. And I also wanted to be sure that I was responsible in a very ethical way about how I conducted myself, and to be conscious about not only getting consent at the beginning of the process, but checking in with the co-participants, the co-researchers, whenever I was planning to interpret or to use the stories or the narratives that they shared with me for a presentation such as this, and to seek ongoing consent and consultation with them. And then lastly, the fourth R, I wanted to be continually reflective on my own assumptions and worldviews. And because I'm a non-Indigenous researcher, and also I've been raised in a medical education culture, those are very strong cultures, and there are times when, even with my long experience in working in this field, where I might be making an assumption or having an unconscious bias or a projection that I would need to be aware of. So I engaged in a lot of reflective practice throughout this studying and this learning and this project. So I sought ethics approval through the UBC Behavioral Research Ethics Board, and I contacted people who worked with the Physicians and Healers Project at the Vancouver Native Health Clinic. And my main interview questions were, please tell me about the work you did before joining this project, and then what inspires and sustains you in your work. And I audio taped and transcribed each interview. Actually, I just transcribed the first 2 interviews, and it took me so long that I sent out the other ones for confidential transcription by a professional person. I did a thematic analysis, and then after sharing the emerging themes that I was coming up with the participants in the study, I did a secondary analysis where I was looking for our shared values and ideas and asked the question, what brings us together? So I was very blessed to have worked with 8 narrators, and you can see on this slide how the basic demographics and relationships were. I was able to do 7 of the interviews face-to-face and 1 by telephone, and there was a range of length of interviews. So after the round of interviews, I gave each participant their transcript and their little audio file, and I asked them for any corrections, edits, and areas that they wished removed or added to their transcript. And in my analysis, I looked for unique, contrasting, and similar stories and themes. And then I presented a draft of my emerging themes for discussion and clarifications just a couple of weeks ago before this presentation. So I'm learning that the work paths taken by the participants prior to joining the Physicians and Healers Project are really diverse, and the stories are told in different ways. Participants really spoke about the impact that elders had on their work paths and their journeys and their encounters with Indigenous healers, or they spoke about becoming elders in their work journeys. And they told stories about being drawn to their work through a network of relationships. And these were relationships with spirituality, with family, with territory, their colleagues, their students, and their patients. And they spoke of being really inspired by a strong sense of community. And that meant communities of practice or organizations or people in a location or a territory. Obviously, families and clans were incredibly important. And many recounted serendipitous or spiritual moments where their directions were altered or paths opened up because of answers to prayers or seemingly very chance encounters. And several people spoke about very difficult life experiences, encounters with oppression or adversity, or witnessing those things that served as sources of inspiration to become strong advocates and to become empowered to make changes for themselves and for their people. And what I'd like to do is, in the next 2 slides, present 2 quotes with some audio in the background that highlight these first 3 emerging themes from the analysis. And I've asked the participants who offered these quotes for their permission to use them, and they have granted their permission to use them in this presentation.
The healers that we worked with were so generous and so authentic and so grounded, and they taught me about fundamental principles of Indigenous health and healing, which were common to every place that we traveled. And it was about being respectful and being grateful and approaching health from a perspective of balance and needing to balance mind, body, and spirit, and not honoring each of those elements in the healing work. And it was about ceremony and humility.
And this is the second quote.
This was kind of closing the circle on what I thought was important after doing the Northern work, that this was very much a missing piece. So I was very interested in the subject of having actually Indigenous people and Indigenous elders specifically as the missing piece in the whole healthcare relationship, that it was the culture and the connectedness to identity and to family and to community and to culture was missing.
So, as I mentioned, this is very much a work in progress, And I'm in the process of ongoing analysis with team members and talking about what it is that we're learning and what it is that will be helpful to present back to the community that was so generous in sharing this information with us. And we're co-developing presentations such as residency teaching or such as this presentation and community presentations. And we're also thinking about what would be a useful resource for the team and the community, such as a compilation of the stories in audio or text that talks about who we are and what brings us together. And in terms of making meaning with what I've been learning so far, I have understood that the oral histories that I was so blessed to be able to listen to offer a really rich way to explore people's experiences, their inspirations, and their relationships. And in sharing of these narratives, this strengthens relationships with and among the communities that are involved. And it helps, I think, to broaden worldviews about what is important in medical education, what is important in Indigenous health, and in ways of doing research in a good way. And the members of the team thought it would be very helpful to utilize this work to bring some kind of what was called perhaps a creation story of how the Physicians and Healers team itself came together and the direction that the team is going in terms of the broader work with medical education and cultural safety. So certainly what I've learned about learning has been really exciting for me as a mature learner, and I'm hoping that for those of you that are listening to this and are thinking about what you might be able to learn in your decolonizing journeys around Indigenous methods. And I think for me, one of the most important steps was really honest, critical self-reflection and asking myself, why am I doing this work? Why am I interested in it? Who am I? And what can I contribute in a good way that does not reinforce some of the unfortunate negative impacts of non-Indigenous researchers working with Indigenous communities. And above all, respecting processes and relationships. And you can see that this presentation was much more about the process of doing the research rather than the outcomes. For me, with my Western medical training, letting go of control was a very important learning, and I'm still learning how to do that. And keeping the commitments, not only the time commitments, but the relationship building commitments that are incredibly important to me in learning how to do this kind of work. I also, as a mature student, learned to use a Mac for the first time, and you can hear from the recording that maybe they weren't always the best recording conditions, but I also learned a lot about how to keep the security of these files and to ensure that people's words were secure and were protected from misuse or appropriation at any point during this whole process. And then of course I learned that with my typing speed, transcription time was really, really critical, and it's often good to outsource that. So I'd like to say in Haida, Hawa, thank you, and I would really like to stop and reflect about any thoughts or questions that come up as a result of this work. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Jen Dahoney, if she has some thoughts and some questions or some guidance that we can open up to in the next few minutes. Thank you. Hawa.
Okay. So it's been an honor to be invited to be a part of this process. Thank you, Betty. So my role in this was as a research participant, and I use that word rather than research subject, which has been a good change over time. And this very much was a model of research being done in a good way. And given that there's a very long legacy of bad research, harmful research, and abusive research done with Indigenous communities over many years, this was a model of how to do it in a good way. And I think Betty managed to steep her process in an Indigenous method in terms of grounding in the 4 R's. So one of our Cree elders, Dr. Verna Kirkness, came up with the idea of research needing to be respectful and relevant, reciprocal, and have responsibility. And when I take that down to the core, I think about first of all, who's going to benefit? And I've been a part of research that hasn't been great and that highly benefits those that dream up the idea. And I've also been a part of research that is grounded in the voices of community. And this research was that. It was about relationship among the team being asked to participate and the researcher. And that type of research takes a good long time to do, and it involves patience, and it involves letting go of hierarchy and control and power. And it was an honor to be a part of this, done in a good way. I'm conscious that I speak about this as someone who wears two hats. I was trained in a university environment, so I have Western training, and I'm also of mixed ancestry of British and Cree background. And when I think about my relationship with communities I work with when I'm doing research, I try to remember that the relationship is at the core of the research, and that our job is to negotiate the space between a powerful institution and a university and an academic environment and the people whose lives we're attempting to benefit. And I see research as a potential for positive change when done in an ethical and respectful way. So thank you, Miigwech.